Jack, what's up, brother? I think we're on officially. I mean, we've had plenty of conversations, but I think officially we're on. Is this round three or four that you've been on the podcast?
3 or 4. Yeah, yeah,
Some
yeah, yeah.
somewhere in there.
Something
Anyways,
like
it's
that.
always good to
Yeah,
talk with you, man. It's always funny because every time I have a conversation with you, because I'm a Christian,
yeah.
a lot of guys will bring that up. Well, he's this and he's that and he's a pagan and he doesn't believe this and he doesn't believe that, as if because I'm a Christian, I'm not allowed to have additional conversations outside of the realm of Christianity. It's a very interesting concept to me.
It is weird, and it's not. I mean, obviously, I mean, we're talking about the new book, and that was one thing that I dealt with when I was writing it because I could have written a niche book for a pagan audience, and
Right.
but the guys I want to talk to are such a bigger group of guys, and
Yeah.
I didn't want to be limited by that. I wanted to be. I have so many. The older I get, I just want to be surrounded by awesome guys who are doing awesome things, and not be like, well, what do you believe about this? And that, I mean, there's certain things that are like breaking points for me, especially over the past like year or so. But I want to be around guys who are trying to be excellent all the time, and I like thank you for having me on this show. I definitely I want to compliment you on what you've been doing all these years. uh, I've been writing in the manosphere or about men's issues for about a decade, a little bit more. And I remember when it was just bunch of guys writing angry blogs, who were a little broken and
Yep.
whatever. And
Yep.
you know, you're really bringing a lot of things into almost really the mainstream, which was not happening. I mean, you just had a congressman on your show the other
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
Yeah, which
Exactly.
is pretty amazing, and that's what needs to happen if any change is going to happen. It needs to
It's
reach a broader people. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that you talk about the quote unquote manis. I actually don't like that term
Oh no, it's
because
terrible. It exists. Yeah.
it's there. And
Yeah.
I think labels serve their purposes in that
Sure.
we can roughly assume what that person is about. But when I hear the label manosphere, you're exactly right. I hear things like broken individuals. Essentially, when I hear manosphere, what I think of is guys who are basically the equivalent of third wave feminists for masculinity. They're so broken, they're so hurt, they can't mature, they can't fix themselves, and it's somebody else's fault. They're victims, and somebody else did something to them, and screw society and screw everybody else in general.
Yeah,
That's what
and
I
I think
hear.
that's what it was. I would say, maybe in 2012 when the Way of Men
Yes.
came out, or like 2014, or all that. That's the way it was, and I think there has been a big change. You have like Tanner speaking at like Manosphere events. He's talking about like
Exactly.
productive families and all that kind of stuff. So that kind of stuff is just changing a lot, and it's good to see it. You know.
It is good. And I've also seen it develop and mature. And this might just come from the guys who, 10 years ago were talking about how to pick up chicks to
Right.
now they're dads, now they're
Yeah.
husbands, now they're
Yeah.
business owners, they're leading their community. And they're like, maybe picking up chicks isn't the ultimate goal. And
Right.
let's change this idea of the quote unquote manosphere to adding value and enhancing the lives of the people that we care about, whatever that looks like for you.
Yeah, and that's for the individual as he matures too. I always say that there was a big discussion in the manosphere about like moving away from that as well, and I was like, well, there is an evergreen crop of young men who need to figure things out about women.
Of course.
And so that's always there. That's going to be there's a new group of 18-year-olds every year that need to figure that stuff out.
Right.
But obviously that if they stay there forever and they're I mean, we can't all be Dan Blazarian, like that's the life
Although
path
at
that
times I'm
is.
thinking, maybe there's something to that. I don't know about this.
He's definitely the Lord of the Earth.
I don't know. I
We,
mean,
he's the
I
fertility god.
yeah, I mean, I think about, you look at that
Yeah,
and I kind of equate it to this. Maybe it's a weird metaphor, maybe it's not a great metaphor, but you think about a video game that you're playing and you play, you try to gather all the resources and the new tools and the new skill set. If you have all the cheat codes, it's cool for like an hour
right.
and then it sucks. For me, I look at my life and I've been married for nearly 17 years now.
Mhm.
I've got 4 kids. we've got mortgages, we've got a business, we've got this and we've got that, all these things that, you know, quote unquote, we're supposed to have at this point.
Right.
And it's challenging, it's difficult, but it's the challenge that makes it meaningful and significant to me. And as much as, you know, sometimes being single and not having kids is, you know, sounds pretty appealing at times,
Sure.
there's also a tremendous sense of value that I think is void in that type of life. And maybe that's just a level of maturity on my part.
Yeah, yeah. And also, I mean, there are going to be different strokes for different folks. You know,
True.
like different guys need different things and different things are going to work out. I mean, I went through a period a few years ago of like, kids, how can I make that happen? You know, like I definitely had a moment with it. I don't think that's what I do or what I'm really here to do in the world, but I don't think that would have been a smart move. I think it would have backfired.
What makes you say that?
Well, I mean, you know, I do have another relationship that I've been in for 23 years. So there's that. My life is a little more settled than people think it is in a lot of ways, but you know, that would have required a very non-traditional arrangement to do something very traditional. And I don't think that that's really how I would have wanted to do it. You know,
Yeah.
so it just wasn't the right choice for me. I decided, and I think, and also I'm a weird artist too. I need to be in my own head and not worry. You know, I rented this office so that I could not do work at my house.
Yeah.
You know, like so.
Look,
so I
man,
could be here and walk around and talk to myself and be a weirdo and make. Like I'm working on music. I don't even know why right now. I'm like teaching myself music production. You know, I need to do stuff like that, and that's kind of who I am. So you know, there are a lot of guys who I think, and this is something that, you know, it has to be addressed as well as in you know, the man conversation, let's say, that's happening all around the world, is that there are going to be a lot of guys who are going to end up being single for most of their lives in whatever way that means, whether they're single and don't have kids, or single and divorced, or single and you know, in various relationships at different times, you know, not just like playing the field every day, because
sure,
that is going to get sad for anybody, I think, by the time if you're doing that for 20-30 years. But you know, the guys have long-term relationships and whatever, and they move through them and different things. And, you know, there's a limited number of women who want to have traditional marriages. And
right.
so forth.
And I think that's increasing, actually.
Yeah.
So, or excuse me, I should say it's decreasing, that traditional concept of marriage and monogamy, et cetera.
Yeah. I mean, that's and while I think, you know, it's having a little bit of a renaissance in some people's mind as far as coming back and be like, hey, maybe this wasn't such a bad idea after all. And but there's still, you know, I like less available women who are going to be interested in that in the world. So
Right.
I mean, there's certain groups of people who are going to fit into that better, and certain who aren't. So I think that, you know, there's just a lot of different groups and a lot of, I always say, different voices for different ears. And you know, there's you know, as long as you're helping these guys live positive and productive lives in whatever way that means, I think that's a good thing.
Did you ever read the book Manhood in the Making? Have you ever read that book by David Gilmour? I believe it's by.
Yes.
Okay,
yeah, I think we actually talked about it at some point.
Oh, we did. That's right.
You caught. I got mad because I thought someone was ripping me off, and it realized that I had ripped them off for like years prior.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, I had. That was on one of your threads, because it was a source that I had used like in 2007, and I had forgotten that I had read it. And then you had the guy who was in one of the essays, I think, in that book.
Yes,
cited in one of the essays.
He wrote it. David Gilmour.
Yeah, it was David Gilmour, or I think it was some like another Harvard academic.
Maybe, I can't remember. It was something about that.
But he had.
I remember that
being good at being a man versus being good at being a man versus being a good man.
Being a good man.
He had said that kind of in passing and whatever, and then I developed it later into something important. But I think that, yeah, that was where I originally had gotten that distinction from, but it was like years after the fact.
I always whenever I forgot about that, now that you say that, but whenever I talk about that, I always give credit because I saw it there, and then I give credit to you at first as well, because you developed that. But the reason you articulated it, what I mean is you explored it, you dive deeper into it. But the reason I brought that book up is because in the book, he talks about the role of men is being a protector, a provider, and a procreator. And I actually disagree with that, because I see a lot of men out there who I would consider masculine, mature men who are adding value to themselves, their families, their community, society, that for whatever reason, they have either decided not to or physically cannot procreate. And I just don't think that makes them less of a man. And what I'm suggesting is that fatherhood doesn't define masculinity, but I do believe maybe a father figure, meaning that you can serve other men, you can groom other men, you can help them develop, but that doesn't mean it has to be your biological son necessarily.
Yeah. And this is my dude is George Washington right now. And he actually never had kids. He actually had some foster children
Sure,
and whatever, they took in. And he was a father figure for an entire country, so that
right.
is also a role. And I think that he's an interesting way that you could look at that for guys who don't end up having kids. Like you can do a lot and you can be, I see myself at this point. I mean, I'm not a young guy, I'm 46 and I've been around a little bit. And, I see guys doing things and I'm like, you really shouldn't do that, man.
Right.
Like, you're gonna
Right.
regret that.
What's
you
funny
can be
though?
a little
Society,
bit more of a voice of moderation on certain things, because
yes.
you're like, that's gonna lead you down a bad path that you don't want to go to.
And mostly it's because you and I have done a bunch of dumb shit in our lives.
Sure.
And we've realized, like, okay, yeah, I actually did that 15 years ago.
Yeah.
That didn't work out for me. So you better but it's interesting because I see society as a whole buck the idea. And I think this is really the premise. There's a lot of things about your book, but really the premise of the book is society rejects the idea of like what you should and shouldn't do.
Yeah.
And to me, I think about the timeless principles that we turn to in mythology, our religions, where regardless of how you feel from a spiritual perspective, there is some eternal truths to the way that we quote unquote should be behaving that will actually serve us very well if we adhere to it.
Yeah, there's a big problem that happened in modernity, which came from science, although it's not science's fault. The idea that anything that we can't measure or find evidence for at a given time, even if it's traditional wisdom, and is not valid, and we should throw it out with the baby with the bathwater because we can't measure it yet.
Right.
I mean, because that was a big thing, in studying feminism and studying like, gender and stuff for years. They couldn't figure out what about men and women was so different. And now they have done more brain studies and hormonal studies, and they actually have more data than they had in the 60s and 70s. But they did some people, went to some islands, and they're like, these people don't seem to care about the same things we care about. Therefore, all these things are socially constructed. And that's not really true. And what we're finding in whether it's dating or marriage or all these things in society is that there are certain things that maybe work out better because, and people have been doing them for thousands of years, not because they just didn't know any better, but because they had tried other things and they didn't work as well.
So one of the things I've
marriage
said a
has
lot
been around
with
for
that,
a minute.
of course.
Yeah.
And I talk about this. Here's the framework I use is that masculinity, femininity, these are biologically constructed dynamics, right? Like men and women are different. We know that. Anecdotally, scientifically, we know that. Okay. It's not a question.
Right.
So we have these biological constructs, and then they're supported societally because they work.
Right.
So society says, oh yeah, the men are bigger, stronger, and faster, so we need them to defend the village. Yeah. That's a societal support of a biological construct, but people seem to get that backwards.
Yeah, well, it's a rational division of labor.
Right.
Like hire the best person for the best job. Like the most skilled person. And also, there's other biological realities that go into that. Well, you need the women to have children, and they can't do the hunting and fighting if they're having children because they need to be doing the children because someone needs to do that job.
And we need to protect the women because they're a resource.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, and all these things are basic, but we're living this weird socially constructed time where, like they said, they threw the baby out with the bathwater, and now we're seeing we're seeing ideas from the 60s and 70s being written into law now. You
Hmm.
know, and the idea that, like, you know, us saying men and women are different is actually very contentious right now.
Which is
Even
strange.
though we have all the data and everything, we have more than we had then, but because we're seeing the people who are promoting these philosophies come of age and come into power as much as anything, you know, like a lot of these just gender theory stuff. I guess I got to see a lot of it early because I went to art school in New York City in
Mm.
early 90s. And the art school I went to was actually a division for the New School of Social Research. So I learned how, at a very young age, how to draw a line on a canvas and make it about social class disparity. You know, like,
All
and
sorts of weird formulations that don't really match up.
yeah, yeah, but I mean that's how you get an A, and that's what people
True.
have been taught for a long time. And so, like, that's, and at the time I didn't know any better and hadn't really explored all those ideas. But you know, like, you find out how you can write a description of a piece of art that you made that plays into some ideas about gender, constructed gender, and you know, challenging that idea and all that kind of stuff. And I was doing that in 1994 or whatever. So you know, I saw a lot of this stuff coming eh, way before. I think a lot of guys, when I started writing about this, a lot of guys were like, "What's all that about? I don't have to deal with that." You know, like
Right.
radical feminists or whatever were just in some faraway place that they didn't have to deal with, and now everyone has to deal with it. And so it's become a thing that's, you know, mainstream, and a problem that no man can really get away from. You know,
It's an interesting point. I'm sure you're familiar with logical fallacies
sure,
and ad hominem attacks and things like this, right?
yeah,
And one thing that's been traditionally painted as a logical fallacy is the slippery slope fallacy,
yes,
where, oh well, you're projecting out into the future what might be, but that's a fallacy because that's not what is. And yet what you're explaining right now is a slippery slope. You have a bunch
oh,
of
yeah,
teenagers or early 20s going into these schools, learning these concepts, trying to get their A's, but also being frankly indoctrinated into this ideology. And now these are individuals who are CEOs, they're running for office, and now they're legislating based on what they learned 20, 30, 40 years ago.
absolutely. And you know, the slippery slope thing, that wasn't necessarily destined to happen.
Mm,
It didn't have to happen, but you could see how it would.
right.
And now it has. You know,
Right.
something could have affected, you know, changed things along the way, because that's the way slippery slopes work. You know, it's like it does. It's not necessarily going to go there, but it looks like there's a strong possibility.
Well,
You
I
know,
think about that even with something as silly as, it being winter here in Maine and you got the driveway that's iced over. I mean, I don't have to slip on the ice. It's a
right?
stronger likelihood that I might because it's
Sure.
icy and slippery,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I could watch my step and be a little bit uh, aware of my footing and
yeah.
actually get to my truck without slipping. But the odds are increased because it's slippery.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And what's really happened, and what I'm seeing more and more that people aren't really see, you know, they're just becoming aware of it now, is that because we really let all those people take over the culture.
Mm,
You know, they run all the magazines. Like, there's no print media about any of us, or
mm-hmm.
anybody doing
Right.
anything positive about masculinity doesn't exist
Do
in
you
the
think
print
people
media.
would care if I mean, look, I guess people care because both you and I are very successful in our own right.
Yeah.
But do you think if we were to create some sort of traditional media outlet or a magazine or a book or whatever, that it actually could compete with some of these? I've heard the term legacy media. I'm not sure if I completely like that term, but I think we understand the point.
Yeah.
The concept of legacy media. What are your thoughts with that?
Well, I think that it wouldn't be a matter of, I mean, you're not going to jump onto newsstands and airports like tomorrow,
Right,
you
right,
know.
of course.
But I do think that that needs to exist, because otherwise there is no counter.
Mm,
And so, you know, legacy media exists because it's been around for, I mean, how long has the New York Times been around?
right, yeah.
You know, I mean, how big of a staff do they have? How much money they have? All these things take time. And so, no, I don't think, and we live in a different era now. I don't know if you need to put out a printed magazine every month to make an impact in the world in the same way that you would have before. But hold my beer. Maybe I'm working on that.
So are you announcing something right here? Like we got to know, man. Are you making an announcement right here?
Somebody I'm working with on this project, but no, we could. I think that there needs to be more than one too. There needs to be a lot of print media, because basically, what is Vanity Fair or a lot of these mainstream magazines or whatever? They're people with the same viewpoint congratulating each other for doing well.
Yeah, I mean, I call it a big circle jerk, right? I mean, that's really what it is.
Kind of, but at the same time, I mean, they're doing it in a very sophisticated way, and you're getting like high end kind of literature and interviews and whatever out of that, and that creates this track record, that we don't have. I think that
Right.
because I was talking about men's magazines a while back, and really the men's magazines now are like what, Recoil, like Recoil,
Yeah.
and like I mean,
you even look at things like Men's Health and Men's Fitness.
Yeah,
I think it's
they
Men's
aren't
Health
written for
magazine.
men.
It's not a men's magazine.
No, they're not written for men in any way that we would understand the definition. And
No.
it's like they're not even written for normal gay men. They're written like the things you see on the cover and whatever. It's very urban, and it's a very small population they're really written for. And I think it's just maybe they're loss leaders for some bigger company or something.
What do you? So look, all right. Let's talk about gay men, because you bring it up. Like,
yeah.
So you say it's not written for gay men, but I think the stereotype is that it is actually, and I would like you to talk about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, regular gay men don't wear dresses.
Yeah, good point. And I'm not suggesting they do, for sure.
They really aren't. I mean, most of those guys are like wearing jeans and t-shirts like everybody else and going to bars right. And they, they're just trying to get laid and to live their lives. They aren't really all that, like, that's a very small group with even in that population.
Sure. Yeah,
like
makes sense.
Fashion, whatever. I mean, those guys are like working as baristas somewhere or whatever.
I think we believe that because it's perpetuated on TV, so I'll give you an example.
Sure.
My wife and I have started watching the show Schitt's Creek, and I don't know if you've seen it, but the son is a very flamboyant,
right,
obviously feminine gay man. And so that's what we see. And so that's what we believe.
Well, and that's always been the thing. And I wrote about that years ago, but it's that's obviously that they're the ones sending the big signals. If some dude's acting normal, you don't know it.
Yeah, true.
He's blending in. And there is definitely a bigger percentage in that community of that way of behavior.
Sure, right.
But and it's part of the stereotype. It's like if you've signed up for that, now that's who I have to become. It's part of the package identity. And so there's a performative aspect there. They change their language and certain things that when they become part of that community, you hang out with, if I go hang out with hunting dudes, I'm going to pick up their turns of phrase.
So look, I'm so glad you brought that up, because look, we're going to talk about the disparity between, and again, I'm speaking in generalities, the homosexual community, for example, and the hunting community, which I don't think generally you would associate with that with the homosexual community generally. Sure. Okay. So you use the term performative aspect. I believe that's right. Whatever community you belong to.
Oh yeah.
If you're part of the homosexual community, the hunter community, the CrossFit community, the body positive movement, the vegan community, pick a community. Jiu-jitsu, exactly. Another good point. Right.
Yeah.
Or I've talked about it. Guys are sick of hearing it. Building a canoe. It's like, okay, well, there's a community of woodworkers, right? So
right.
And there is a performative aspect. One thing that you've talked about that I really, really appreciate, and you actually checked me on this years ago, is you said it isn't disingenuous, and I'm paraphrasing here, so I want you to clarify, but it isn't disingenuous to work on making yourself more. So some people perceive it as performative, and yet I think you make the case of, no, I'm actually just trying to be the best version of that individual who I want myself to be.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Everybody wants to make it, because there's this value attached with being authentically whoever you are and unchanged in some way. Like you just arrived and that's who you are. And anyone who uh, has really improved their lives in any way or made themselves better has had to work on it.
Mm.
You know, I mean, people look at like old things of me and they're like, oh, you like I'm faking now because I'm different. You know,
Right.
like, no, I said, hey, you could change who you are, and I did. and
Right.
and people have talked about like my voice. I have a narrator voice that I use for different things, and now it's actually just a bigger part of my voice. It's not
Mm.
always. I mean, obviously, I go all over the place, and I'm, you know, if I'm going to be happy at a party, I'm talking a different way than I'm talking, you know, when I'm doing Jack Donovan narrator voice. And so, you know, but that is my voice has changed from
Right.
doing that for long enough. That's become part of who I am, and I liked it that way, and that was the goal. You know,
And
so
it should be that, right? Like
yeah,
you
yeah. I mean,
should
like
have
my
aspirational
body has
goals.
changed, and that changes who you are, and that's a big
Mm.
thing that I've talked. And I'm sure you've experienced that with working out and with jujitsu and everything. When you are putting yourself through any kind of physical trial, yeah, with you know, grappling and so forth, you're fighting other men all the
Right.
time, and that
Right.
changes how you perceive yourself and them, and whatever, that changes who you are. And that's why I think that it's so important for men to do those kinds of things, because it changes them, and it's good. And one of the things that I've said it a few times recently, it's happened to me because if you would have asked me if I was when I was 27 years old, if I thought of myself as being strong,
Mm.
like physically strong, I'd be like, I guess I'm kind of strong. I don't know,
Sure. Right.
and
Right.
now it's like a weird characteristic that people associate with me that I've had to get used to, because I got a lot stronger over a lot of
Right.
years. And we were doing something in jiu-jitsu, and there was this like 17-year-old, and I he was trying to armbar me, and I just lifted his whole body up, and you know, and I got kind of in trouble for it because the coach was like, "You should escape from that. Technically, he's small."
Yeah. The point is
But
not to be strong; it's to be technical,
right,
right?
right, right. I was just
Sure.
laughing while I was doing it because I think it's funny that I can,
It
you know. And
is.
then I had to think about it, like, am I a bully now? Like, when did that
Mm.
happen? You know, like, am I, you know, and that's just because my body has changed and my aptitudes have changed, and so it changes who you are in all kinds of different ways. And so that now, yeah, I'm a pretty strong guy for my size,
Hmm.
and people comment on it all the time, and so it's just part of who I am, and that wasn't part of who I was before. But it comes from challenging yourself and changing, yeah, like pushing your boundaries. You know, like I'm sure you have a million things that you've done over the past few years that you're like, oh, I can do that now. I mean,
Of course.
the same with narrating a book. I mean, or doing podcasts or public speaking or anything that you have to do. All that stuff was fake it till you make it. You
But
know,
it's weird
like,
because people will say that, and here's one of the things I get,
mhm.
and not a lot, but there's a fringe of people who say things like, "Oh, you're compensating, you're over," and in a way, you know what, they're right, because that's actually true. Like I didn't consider myself good enough at whatever it is you're addressing right now, and
Yeah,
so I'm compensating by shoring up my weaknesses. You're pointing it out as some sort of deficiency or flaw or negative thing, and I look at it and think, yeah, you're right. I wasn't good enough at whatever. And so now I'm practicing whatever, let's take jujitsu,
yeah.
so that I can be more competent. Yes, I'm compensating, but that doesn't make me disingenuous.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if you, it's like anytime you realize a weakness in yourself and try to fix it, you're overcompensating. You know, like 'cause
Yes.
I recognize the weakness, therefore I have to work on it. Therefore, I'm overcompensating, and you do a little bit. And this happens with masculinity and all kinds of things and everything else. There is a little bit of a pendulum, like you maybe overshoot a little bit where you needed to be, and then you become a little bit more confident and you settle in something that looks a little more comfortable. I mean, I
But
would
you
say that
have to
with my
overshoot. You have
yeah,
to.
yeah. I mean, I'd say that with my early narration. Like it's a little bit like my first book that I narrated was a little bit like overly blah, blah, and
Of
you know, I went a
course.
little big with it, and now I can find a comfortable like place with it because I've been doing it for so long. And I,
Right.
you know, like you have to feel out where the far end of it is, and then find where it's comfortable and feels right.
I think a lot of men are afraid of the perception if I try quote unquote too hard. You're
Right.
talking about narration oh, well, if I do that, what will people think of me? Or if I go to jujitsu, what will people think? Or if I do this thing or that thing, people will accuse me or point fingers or laugh or poke or whatever it is that they do. And so they just don't at all. They just settle for mediocrity. And then they try to justify to themselves, well, the reason I don't work out is because I'm happy with how I am. And that's a
Right.
huge lie. And
Yeah.
people know it's a lie. And it's destructive. It's damaging to their own psyche and well-being.
Yeah. Well, people know it's a lie, but they'll get enough affirmation for saying it from other people who feel the same way.
Mm,
And so it becomes very comfortable. There'll be a ton of other people around them who also are afraid to go try something new and then just won't accept who they are. And so there's this big affirmation cycle that a lot of people get in, because people wouldn't do it if everyone was like, shut up, you're full of it.
which I think more people should say, like,
Yeah,
screw
yeah,
off,
yeah,
like,
totally.
don't be
Like,
happy with being fat. Like, and people say, well, that's you're fat shaming, or you're phobic of something. It's like, no, I just think people should actually strive to not be fat and instead be more physically fit. I'm not afraid of that. I just think it'll be better for people.
yeah, and that's as I finished up doing the audiobook of this book the other day, that's one of my favorite parts at the end of the book, where I talk about, I mean, there's certain truths that are self-evident, that have always been, men have always recognized, that transcend religion and transcend different cultures and whatever. It's like, we've always thought it was better to be beautiful than it is to be ugly, and better to be smart than it is to be dumb, and better to be strong than it is to be weak, and better to be courageous than it is to be afraid. And obviously, the person who can't move around, because I've been heavier and lighter in my life, and I can tell you, just 15 pounds away from where I am right now is a huge difference in my capability.
Hmm.
Like, as far as me being, just getting tired, and just getting tired and being uncomfortable.
Right.
And you can tell me that you're comfortable like that all you want, but if you're walking around at 260 and you're my size, that is not comfortable.
It's not
You have
comfortable.
no idea like how much that hurts. And if you've always been that way, maybe you don't realize what health even is. Like,
Yeah,
because
you've
if I
deluded
can,
yourself a little bit, for
oh
sure.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Because how could you sleep at night if you didn't? Like, if
right.
for
Oh yeah.
example, look, I've been 50 pounds overweight, more than I was today. And
Yep.
I remember a cathartic moment for me. I went into the gym and I picked up a 45-pound plate. And I'm like, no wonder I was tired all the time. A 45-pound plate is not insignificant. That's a
Right.
heavy chunk of weight. And so I'm picking this up. I'm like, holy cow. This was at night. This was wrapped around my neck.
Yeah.
This was wrapped around my lungs. And no wonder I was snoring, and I had restless leg syndrome, and I was uncomfortable, and I couldn't sleep, and I was
Yeah.
exhausted because I was carrying this around every day, all day, even into my sleep for my entire life. What a
Yeah.
horrible position to be in.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And as it said, that should be self-evident. Like, to most people, like, that looks uncomfortable. I mean,
Mm,
I always see people like try to run when they're really heavy to lose weight. I'm like, that's gotta hurt. Like, I've tried to run
yeah.
heavy, and I wouldn't start there.
Or doing
Because
pull-ups.
yeah, you're right. But
I mean, look, look, I'm not going to judge it. Look, I see obese individuals in the gym,
oh yeah,
and I think that's awesome
excellent. No, yeah, I
because
mean,
that person's trying to improve themselves.
yeah, they're always afraid that people are judging them, and maybe somebody who has a
Of
really
course, there's
bad
always an
self-image
a-hole.
themselves are. But yeah, when I see people like that, I'm like, well, would you rather them be there or McDonald's?
Exactly.
They need to be at the gym. That's where they should be. And so
Right.
that they're working on a problem rather than just not working on a problem.
I think what people run into a lot, or either they run into it or they tell themselves, is that those pursuits are more about vanity than they are functionality or feeling good about yourself. For example, I've been broke in my life, and I've also been in a position where we're relatively wealthy and we can take care of our finances and mortgages and buy the things that we want and go on the vacations and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
And I'll hear people say things like, well, I care about my kids too much to like worry about pursuing my career and building wealth. It's like, s- yeah, I well, okay, I can appreciate that. You're presenting a false dichotomy here, though, and saying that you can either be wealthy or care about your kids. There's a third and an infinite number of options where you can actually build wealth and still be an extremely successful father figure, husband, patriarch of your home, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in fact, you could be more successful. I mean, there's that
Yeah.
there's that idea that this old kind of 1950s or 80s or whatever thing that comes around where like the successful man never sees his children and he's always far away, and there's songs about
Mm-hmm.
it and all that
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuff. I figure out what that popular one from like the 70s or 80s is. But um where son just becomes just like his dad, and then whatever. But there is that idea, but I think that there's a happy medium. And obviously you have a lot more to give your kids if you have more money, and as we've learned over the past year, especially, money is freedom. It has a lot to do. I mean, I was lucky enough that I could rent the space, and
Mm.
then I can have guys over here to roll when I thought maybe the gyms might all close down. Like, oh, well, I can go do that. You could, or
Yeah,
you can
good
build a
point.
home gym, or you can do. There's a lot of things that you can do that you can't do if you're poor. And man, I was glad that I've been a delivery guy making like no money. Really, for most of my life, I made about the exact same amount of money for years and years and years.
Yeah.
And I've only been self-employed for about 5 years, 5, 6 years, something like that. And yeah, I mean, man, that would have hit me hard. When I
Mm-hmm.
had nothing in the bank really, and like no cushion, no anything, you would have been desperate.
Mm.
I would have been desperate, definitely,
Yeah.
for and then a lot of people are in that situation still. I mean, I'm just lucky that I was not, at that point. But
I mean, I don't know if you're lucky or, I mean, let's not gloss over fortunate events, but you've also created it for yourself too.
oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, and I've definitely made some smart choices that I'm proud of.
Right.
But I mean, there was a lot of years where I was equally smart. I just didn't figure it out yet. There's
Good point.
lots of guys who have a lot of potential and they're just not there.
Yeah.
Like at 25, I wasn't there. And so it's like there is that's the luck of it, is like when stuff happens to you in life,
Right.
certain things,
Right.
you know.
Well, and you said something interesting that I don't know if I totally agree with. You said wealth is, or money is freedom. You said something like that. I
Mhm.
think it can represent that, but I also think if you become so fixated and addicted to the wealth proportion of it without what it represents, that it actually can be self-imposed shackles. Because if all you're chasing is the dollar or the zeros in your bank account, then are you really presenting and giving yourself freedom, or are you just shackling yourself to chasing that endeavor or that pursuit?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I definitely look at money as freedom, because I just want to have enough money to do stuff I want.
Hmm.
I just want to I work on cool projects and do the stuff I want, and that's. But yeah, no, some guys really become obsessed with money itself, and I wish maybe I was a little bit more that way because I would make more money. Because there is a thing, like, if you're super into making money, you get excited by it, and you're good at things that you get excited about to a certain
Right.
extent. And so guys who are really into making money, have that going for them. That I'm like, I'm doing fine. This is cool. Like, I'm good where I'm at. Like, I'm satisfied where I'm at. But so there's a happy medium, I think, there, with that. But definitely, yeah, if you think about nothing else but money, and obviously status, like status purchases and things like that. There's certain people who get fixated on that kind of thing, and then then you're buying things you can't really afford, just
Right.
for and working to afford the thing. I mean, it's that Fight Club thing, like, to buy things we don't even need.
Right. Well, there's
You know,
status purchases, but then there's also status signaling and status virtues, like,
oh yeah,
I'm more honorable than you, or I care more about the animals than you, and so you're inferior to me, or I care about gun legislation because I don't want to see people die, and so that makes me superior to you, or I care about open borders because I care about people and you don't. And so these are status signaling versus status purchases.
right. Well, it's really easy to gain status by having a feeling. uh I mean, that's what that is. I'm demonstrating a feeling. All the things that you've worked for, that would theoretically make you better than me or more accomplished, but I have a feeling that's better than your
Right.
feeling, therefore I
Right.
become. I mean, that's an easy way to
That's an
feel like
interesting
you're
way to look
better
at
than
it.
somebody. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't actually have to accomplish anything to have a feeling. So
Yeah. I mean, everybody has them,
yeah,
right? Like that isn't something unique to you. We all have a feeling
right,
about things, positive or
yeah.
negative.
Yeah, like I feel very strongly about many things. That doesn't mean my opinion really even matters sometimes. But
Well, I think that's actually one of the problems of social media. I love social media because it's afforded me the opportunities that you and I have to talk
sure,
and us to build this movement, and you as well to build your movement and share your ideas.
yeah,
But one of the problems is that we've given everybody a voice, and they begin to believe that their voice is relevant or equal or superior or just as good as anybody else. And look, the fact of the matter is, some opinions matter, and some actually don't, or they carry less weight than others.
yeah. I mean, it's well, it's like the cliche. It's like if you do anything athletic online, there's a million people who have an opinion, but most of them don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
Like
Right.
that's it's whether it's someone coaching a still from a jiu-jitsu. Like I had posted a picture of me rolling with somebody, and you get people coaching it. I'm like, it's a
You should have
still.
done this. You should have
It's a
done that.
still. Like it's a
Right.
still of like within. I took 3,000 pictures that day. That was a
Right.
still. But and we get the same thing with lifting or anything like that. You always get some guy who's 18 and read 3 blogs about it and is telling you what to do. And the absurdity of that was, I mean, when I used to hang out with this professional power lifter, who was like a 900-pound squatter, and he was always having people tell him he didn't know how to squat. And like, and like, who are you? Like
Right.
that, it's, uh, and that's one of the bad things about the democratic ideal, I think, is that it created this sense that everybody's opinion is always equal.
Mm.
And that's not necessarily what I think the founders really meant. But that's very American, I think, even more than anything else. It's like uh, people even say, just comments on the internet or
Right.
whatever. Everybody's opinion. People hate it when you close down comments. And I'm like, I don't need comments on this. And you don't, I always say, and this is just me from being on the internet for a long time, I'm like, I don't have to provide a platform for you to insult me.
Right.
You're free to do that, like in some other way. Create your own platform to do that, but I don't have to like provide the space for you to do it.
Right.
That's like you're coming into my house and insulting me, and I'm like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
Like,
And here, welcome. Come in and stay here and insult me and my family and put us at risk and threaten us. Sure, sure, sure. Yeah. Come on in. Nobody would
yeah,
ever
yeah,
do
that's
that.
yeah, no, thank you, not gonna do it.
Well, I think when you take this concept of freedom and freedom of speech and the right to say things, if you don't marry that and couple that with individual responsibility, that's where we run into issues. So, for example, I have an individual responsibility to listen to you and other people that might conflict with your ideas. And then it's my responsibility as an individual and a leader of my family and friends and colleagues and people who follow along to then discern, okay, is Jack right here, or is Joe right? Or maybe Jack's partially right and maybe Joe's partially right. But it's an individual responsibility for me to discern that information, not just to assume that both you and Joe are equal in whatever your thoughts or perspectives are. But we've absolved personal responsibility, right? It's not, oh no, it's not the individual. Jack, it's your fault. If you're saying the wrong thing, that's your fault. No, it's the person who's trying to decipher that information or not, whose responsibility it actually is.
Yeah. I mean, that's obviously we can incite them to whatever, and then absolves them of responsibility for their actions.
Yeah. What's your take on? I know we haven't talked a lot about the book because I mean, every time we have a conversation, I love it. We can go 1,000 different directions. But one of the things you talk about is the
Yeah.
concept of religion versus spirituality, and I'm always curious about that because I am both I would consider myself a spiritual and a religious person,
Right.
and I'm really interested in your perspective on the differences and the values of each spirituality and religion.
Well, I think religion, generally speaking, is an established form.
Hmm.
Yeah, you're doing something that's been repeated. Actually, ritual, I think the original Latin goes to mean the right or proven way. So it's something that's been tested, and we do it a certain way all the time,
Right.
and that's the way most churches are, and so forth. And so there's a certain way that you do things, and there's certain establishment and structure to that. Whereas when people say spiritual, sometimes they mean that they just want to say something that doesn't mean anything.
Well,
They
look,
want
the
to say
one I
something
hear all the
vaguely
time,
positive. Huh?
the one I hear all the time is guys will say, I'm up here in the mountains or I'm fishing and this is how I connect with God. I'm like, that actually might be true,
Yeah.
but they make it sound like anything outside of just organically connecting is the right and proper way.
Yeah. And obviously there are a bunch of ways to, catch that fish.
Right.
Uh, and for, again, different voices for different people. We're different, and different things work for different people. I do think that, yeah, a lot of guys do have that experience, and being out in nature, you do ascertain something eternal. There's some mountains are bigger than you, and they're older than any of us. There's big old things out in the world, and I think that you can appreciate them that way. But that's just, to say that also, studying a religious text does not have value. I mean, that's like wisdom of mankind written down.
For thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah, for thousands and thousands of years. Whether you're talking about, like, some of the myths or whatever that I'm talking about, whether you're talking about the Bible, you're talking about ancient wisdom, really. And so much of it hasn't changed. And that's one of the great things about, when I was writing this book, I was seeing so many overlapping ideas.
Right.
And whether you're reading, ancient Greek philosophers, or you're reading, the Havamal from the Old Norse, there's huge parts of it that are just basic good guy advice.
Yes.
It's Heraclitus, theogony and works and days, and like that stuff is like, basic guy advice. Like, you shouldn't spend too much money. You should respect this, and you're going to have to work hard if you want things in life, and things that either you or I would say to anybody if they asked for good advice.
Of course.
And they were giving the same advice in ancient Greece, and they were attributed to Odin in the Old Norse, and so much of it is just good advice. And so, like, to say that there's no value in reading that good advice is foolish, and can be lazy, because some guys are not readers. They're just like, they don't want to read anything, and that's a little bit of laziness, in certain ways. So it's harder for some guys than it is for others, but I think that we all can do that. If you can make it through life, if you can read an email and you can make a comment on the internet, you can sure read a book.
And you can also filter it through your lens and determine what is accurate and what is good and what is righteous and what will serve you and what won't.
And what is useful at what time in your life.
Yeah, good point. It changes.
Huge with books is that, you can read a book when you're 25 and it's garbage to you. Like, it's like there's nothing, or you interpret it an entirely different way.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as you get older, you might come back to the same book and like, this is amazing. Like, this is exactly right. This is exactly what I wanted to read right now.
Right.
I mean, I did that with a lot of Nietzsche's work. It's like you read it and, for the quotes, like most people do. People read Nietzsche and they're like, here's some, some badass quotes that I can put into some stuff or whatever when you're younger. And then, I get to a different point in life, and I think in a weird way, me and Nietzsche have a bunch of stuff in common. And, I could listen to an audiobook of Thus Spake Zarathustra and be like laughing out loud, like, oh, I get that. Yeah, like, yes. Good one, man. And like, we're having a conversation, and I couldn't have done that at 25 because I didn't know enough. I didn't know enough about certain things, and I didn't know the references he was making and all kinds of things. So you can get different things out of different things at different points in your life.
Yeah, and I think that goes against the grain of what I've dubbed as the doctrine of popular culture, which is you just take the sound snippet and then you interpret it through whatever lens or whatever narrative you want it to fit, and then it means what it means. Like Nietzsche's "God is dead," for example. You hear that quoted a lot. Well, let's actually think about the context in which he was saying that. Let's look at the other text that supports that, or that dances around that, and then look at it as a collective body and determine what he was actually saying versus what we think we want him to be saying.
Right. I mean, obviously, like that's a lot of Christians hate Nietzsche, and he had some issues with Christianity for sure. But I mean, he was like, I think his father was a pastor, but it's. Yeah, if you look at the context of that, and that was actually the first chapter of the book, I talk about that because what he was really talking about is a collapse of moral consensus, and a collapse of like agreement on what is good, and what is the right life path, and what is all the values of society were really collapsing. And it was probably in part because that break between Protestantism and Catholicism, because when it was all Catholicism, everybody was on the same page. Pope said that's what we did. And then
Right.
that's
No
where we're at.
questioning. That's what it is.
And then there's that one break. And then that really started a lot of other breaks that eventually became tons and tons of different like sects and things. And so you have a whole bunch of people with a whole bunch of different takes on things. And that creates, a lot of room to move for different people. And that's what he was really talking about. And I think that we're existing in the like final end. Well, I don't know. I mean, it could go deeper. I don't know. Like this collapse of moral consensus is what we're really seeing in America right now and all around the world, is that we can't agree on what is good, and we can't actually even agree on what facts are.
Yeah.
And that's a huge problem in society, because then I literally don't trust anything I read in the news because like anymore.
You can't. How can you?
Yeah. And that's new. That's very, 50 years ago, if Walter Cronkite said a thing, everybody's like, oh, well, clearly that made some sense.
That's exactly what it is. Right.
Yeah, that must be what happened. But now I assume they're lying to me about most things, or that they're lying, or that the information is incomplete, or, we haven't, like when they have shooters and so forth like that, the first day commentary is always wrong.
Right.
So it's always, here's what everyone's going to say.
And but then people get pissed at you because you didn't offer commentary. That's what people do to me. Is like, well, you had this shooting situation and you didn't provide any commentary. I'm like, I know, because I would like to see how this develops before I formulate a concise, coherent opinion on the actual thing that took place.
Yeah, instead of just running your mouth, which is what they want you to do. They run your mouth and tell me how to feel about this.
Yes.
Is what, that's the job of a pundit, really. They want you to be a pundit. Tell me how I'm supposed to feel about this event, because I'm not sure how to feel about it. And you don't know yet. If you're being responsible about what comes out of your mouth, you don't know yet. And that's one of the things, as I said, talked about Washington a lot in the book, and that was one of the things that he was really good at. Although I always wonder if he would even survive in modern society, because he would have waited for a long time.
Right. I didn't think he would have played the game that's being played today.
Right. And someone wrote an article recently about Trump that said, because now that he doesn't have Twitter, he can't just run his mouth all day long. And it's actually kind of better, because I guess he made a statement about some stuff that Biden was doing, but it was like a complete thought. It was like
a coherent thought.
Statement.
Right. Instead of 40 characters or whatever it was.
Yeah. And I think that that's really what someone at that level should be doing at this point, instead of just like running their mouth after each thing happens every single day. Wait until you form a responsible opinion about something that you can really get behind, and that you're not going to have to back away from it in 15 minutes when the evidence all changes, which it will.
Well, either they'll back away from it, but more likely is they'll double down, or they'll craft their narrative to fit, they'll craft their perception of it to fit the narrative that already exists in their mind. One of the things I've seen with journalism in particular is it used to be that we would report the facts. So for example, Jack Donovan and Ryan Mickler had a conversation on March 24th at 1:57 p.m. That's the facts. Now you can interpret that how you want, but now it's like, well, Jack and Ryan talked about how they hate religion and, and how they hate fat people. And so it's like they craft all these narratives based on this little sliver of a conversation that they don't paint within the entire context of what it is that we actually talked about. It's wild, man.
Yeah, man. I'm fighting with Wikipedia, and I have been, because they started an article about me, and it's the worst. And it's basically a long BuzzFeed article about anything that I've ever said that has offended anyone.
Yes.
And that's all it is. It just quotes about people who have been critical for me, as used to describe my entire life's work.
Right.
And, and as I said, we have a problem that we don't have anybody writing on our side, like about anything. I'm like, it's really skewed, because, well, I know I've sold thousands of books this month, and I get letters, as you do, every day from men who are like, hey, you really changed my life. Thank you. You're doing something really positive, all that stuff. And we both get that. And that's really the truth of what I'm doing. But the truth in that perspective is like, here's all the things that somebody who doesn't like anything that Jack Donovan's ever written ever said.
Well, and
And
part of the reason is because you can't grab like a quick soundbite of that. You can't extract just a quick soundbite of the nuance and the context and everything else. And this goes back to what you were saying earlier. We've become so lazy. I remember this was probably months ago. I made a post about a book I was reading regarding Greek mythology, and somebody
yeah,
had quipped back, "Aren't you Christian?" As if being Christian excludes me from reading about Greek mythology. It's like I can explore these concepts. And I think that's what you do a great job illustrating,
oh,
not only in your work generally, but in your book of like, let's look for these truths. Maybe they're conjured up, maybe they're myths, maybe they never happened.
yeah.
Is there still some things that we can learn from this story that might actually impact our lives in the positive?
And what's absurd about that is that most of that material, and especially the Norse material, but much of the Greek stuff, a lot of the classics we have because monks sat around copying them. Like monk
I
and like
agree. Truth
Christian
is
monks sat
everywhere.
around writing all that stuff down and translating it.
Sure.
And I mean, that's the only reason we have any of the Norse myths is because Snorri Sturluson is, who was a Christian, wrote down a lot of this stuff.
Hmm.
And a lot of this material is recorded by Christian monks. And
Interesting. I
obviously
didn't
they
know
thought
that.
it was of value. Oh, yeah, oh, totally. Yeah. It's all written down by Christians, and because I mean, there is no written material in Proto-Germanic, like the language that they would have used at that
Yeah, good
time,
point. Sure.
because they wrote,
It's got to be
all
translated
through
and
these
documented,
woods, it like
scribed.
it goes away, and most of the people couldn't even write. So
Yeah.
it was a pre-literate culture. So like, yeah, they didn't have that,
It's
and
funny
so
because I'll say something and somebody will say, well, Jocko said that. I'm like, well, actually, Aristotle said that 2,000 years ago.
yeah,
It's like nobody said anything new. We're just kind of regurgitating it and then saying it in a way that is maybe more indicative of the times or the language or the way that it can be consumed. But it's all already there. Like we're just saying it differently, and it might apply to you, or it might uh you might resonate with it or you might not, but we're all saying stuff that's already been said.
yeah, in some way or another. I mean, unless we're responding to something that wasn't invented yet,
Yes, sure, of course, right.
but in general terms, yeah. I mean, that's that's why I love the Greek stuff, because they actually wrote everything down, so we actually do have that, and so we see all of their going back and forth and thinking about stuff. I mean, the way that they thought about religion and philosophy was also very varied, because we have
Hmm.
hundreds of years of that. And so they're like, I don't know if the gods are real or not. There was that going for hundreds of years. Like, I don't know if the gods are real or not. Maybe they are. Then, but other people said that they absolutely were. They have different stories about how they evolved. Like, here's the one creation story, here's another creation story. There's different authors have different takes on it.
To me,
All
it's
that
just
stuff
the
happened.
wrong target. You're focusing on the wrong issue. Look, I have
Yeah,
faith that what I believe is true and accurate. I wouldn't believe that if I didn't think that was the case. But look,
right,
it's also faith, meaning I can't prove that. I don't know that with
right.
100% certainty. That said, it's the wrong target.
Yeah,
Okay, the right target is that what I believe has served me and millions of other people well. And if you learn that from Buddhism or Christianity or paganism or whatever, I don't care. We're all trying to improve. We're all trying to get better. Let's serve each other. Let's help. And I don't care which God you got it from. Let's just do it.
yeah, no, absolutely. And that's like I said, that's one of the big things that I came to about this book, was looking at all these patterns and where they overlap. And here are the things that men have always talked about, some basic ideas.
Mm-hmm.
They've always talked about the same things, and they're talking about them with different gods with different names at different times, but they're all doing the same things. Like in this book,
Right.
I talked about, obviously, there's the archetype of the warrior, which is almost always the same. It does the same story, and Joseph Campbell and people like that talked about this as well.
Right.
But there's some very simple features. I mean, I can nerd out and tell you why Superman is basically the striker, and that I talk about in this book. Oh, he's powered by the sun. He's powered by the sun. He has lightning that comes out of his eyes.
Yeah.
He was adopted. All the things that Heracles was, you can find in the Superman myth that's been reinvented.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? What is the significance of the whole solar concept? Stay solar, the solar concept that you've really embraced over the past several years.
Well, I talk about the book about the, the idea of the father and then the father in darkness. And, that's the hidden part of being the father figure, is that I think that you have to obviously go into a place of confusion and indecision before you make the decision, then tell people how it's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
You have to investigate. You have to go through if I do this, if I tell them this, they're going to do that. If I tell them this, they're going to do that. I mean, that's what being a leader really involves. This, depth into darkness and confusion. And as far as the solar ideal, I am a guy who goes towards forbidden things. I've always done that. That's just who I am. If they tell me something's bad, I'm going to go look at it.
You're like, I want to see for myself what that's all
about.
Yeah.
I mean, that's who I am. And, I've that pushes, I think, a lot of men to identify as being that. And I was associated with a lot of darkness and had that kind of thing around me a lot. But that's not really who I am. I'm actually a pretty happy guy. I'm not morose. I'm not focused on death. I'm not focused on hurting people or, insulting them and making life bad. That's not really who I am. I got into writing about masculinity really because of the heroic ideal. I was obviously interested in all these bad things and whatever, and villains and so forth, but I can't think of anything better in the world than heroic masculinity. I think that, and when I saw that was dying in the world in some way, and we're being degraded or being, dismissed, that's kind of what got me signed on in many ways to, hey, this is really important and people should care about this. And so I've just been exploring that in different ways for years. And it became the Stay Solar thing to me started out at Volgang, my land. And I had, there was this dark culture that, was really part of contemporary kind of Odinism and that kind of stuff. That was just, and that's, I think, has to do with a lot of factors. But I'm like, there's too much darkness around us. I'm like, we need to get more solar. And it just became that. And where are there bones everywhere? Like we need to change this. Like brighten things up. My joke's been gold. I want gold. But it started out as an aesthetic thing, but then as I looked at it more and more and more, this idea of the sun as representing goodness and knowledge. Right. And that's really what light does, right? I mean, when we always think of goodness as being light. Well, light makes the world intelligible, makes us be able to understand things. Without light, we're in darkness and everything's confused.
Sure.
We need the light.
And it represents truth as well. Light is, especially, I think about that in the Christian faith, is that light is always synonymous with truth and goodness.
Yeah. Shine a light on it. Shine a light on it. Like, show us the truth. And so all these ideas come really from this idea of the sun. And I talked about in the book, the idea of a sky father, because that's also a very old idea and transcends religion. There's every religion kind of has a father in the sky. And in many ways, I think that comes from, and we could, talk about context or whatever, but, men need to look up to something. And literally when we're boys, we looked up to our fathers, but not really our father, but the idea of a father, because you can't be your father. You're going to be like him, but you're not going to be him. You're going to be something else. You're going to be an idea, like a platonic form of a father. And I think that men throughout history, it's like, well, what does the father look up to? Like, what's the father beyond the father? This higher ideal, like, what is the most perfect idea? Like, of everything that you're trying to do in your life, what is the most perfect form of that you can imagine? And that becomes God in many ways. Like this is
completely.
Yeah. I mean, that's your ideal. And that's your North Star then. That's the thing that you're trying to become more like. When you judge your own behavior, you're looking up towards this ideal that's better than you and being like, I want to be more like that.
Right.
And what would that do? I actually had these made because, I've been talking about George Washington. I had little bracelets made that say, what would Washington do? Because
really? I'll have to pick one up.
Yeah. That's just for fun. I haven't even put them up for sale yet. I just, I had a bunch of them made. But yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good idea. Like, what would Washington do in this situation? It's probably a good answer.
Yeah, it's a good point. As you
And
know, it's funny, as you were talking about that, I just picked up this new watch. It's a Garmin watch, and it's the
yeah,
I think it's like the Phoenix Solar version or something.
nice.
And as I picked it up, I was thinking of you. I'm like, man, this reminds me of Jack. And it's actually got, you can't see it, but it's actually
Yeah.
got like a little thing of like how often I'm out in the sun, and how that the sun. What's interesting about this watch
Uh-huh.
is the sun actually recharges the battery in the watch itself, which is kind of
Yeah.
an interesting
Nice.
concept. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's kind of funny. I think about that even in our faith, and Tanner's very much the same way because we share the same faith.
Right.
And I don't know if you guys have talked about this. I know you guys are personal friends, but in our faith, we have what we would say is the highest degree of glory, which is the celestial kingdom,
Mhm.
which is signified by the sun. Like this isn't
Yeah.
this isn't any new thing, right? This is as old as man himself.
Yeah. 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 No, I mean, no, I love talking to Tan. We've sat here in this room actually and talked about ritual and religion and stuff for hours. We have a really good back and forth about that kind of stuff because, at the end of the day, we're talking about a lot of the same ideas.
Yes.
And that's what I think is really interesting. And I think that's also really important. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to go in that direction with this book, is because we're at a really, rough time in history for men as far as and I'd much rather reach out to all these guys. We're in the same fight. Like, there's a lot of people who'd be like, want to divide us in all kinds of ways that don't matter anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a real problem with masculinity and freedom right now that is like supersedes all other concerns, I think. And that's, I think, really important to look for these commonalities. Like, what do we both care about that matters, rather than like, what is this, minutia that we can debate.
Right. Let's argue about Mr. Potato Head as opposed
Right.
to let's argue or let's get on the same page about, serving our families and the people we care about and making ourselves more capable and having some money in the bank account and creating some experiences for ourselves, which is really what everybody wants. Not the fact that Mr. or Mrs. Potato Head is this or that or gender neutral. Like nobody actually cares about that.
Yeah. 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 And I think that, that especially, for all these guys who are talking about men and masculinity, we're in it for basically the same reasons. We care about the same things to a greater or lesser extent. And so let's find those commonalities. And that's why I think the solar message has kind of caught on with a lot of guys. There's all guys creating all kinds of like solar accounts and all
I know, I've seen them all. Not
Yeah,
all
yeah.
of them, but I've seen a bunch of them. Like,
yeah,
that's Jack's influence, which I love to see, man.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's great. And it's so positive. I can't be embarrassed about that.
No,
like,
I've seen the
guys are
same thing
talking
with
about being
sovereignty.
more like the sun and being strong and
Right, it's
being emotionally controlled and all kinds of things. Oh, like nothing to be ashamed of there.
not at all.
Pretty good about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel the same way about sovereignty. I wrote that book 3 years ago, and I see
Yeah.
guys talking about sovereignty, and I see their Instagram handles and their user IDs as sovereign so and so, and I'm like, that's awesome. Whether they learned it from me or somebody else, I think
Yeah.
great, because it was there long before I ever introduced it. That's for sure.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, yeah, it's great to put that kind of stuff out there, and that's something you could really be proud of at the end of the day. It's undeniably positive influence. Although, I mean, I guess someone else would disagree in some way, the people who are, against Potato Head or whatever. But
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd really have to grasp at straws to say that trying to help men improve themselves is somehow a negative thing. But like you said, people do grasp at those straws, and
yeah, people do
we
it,
know
but
it's not something worthy of consideration.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that at the end of the day, I think we both be proud of what we're doing and putting out there, and that's exciting. I mean, it's good to have a legacy that you can be proud of.
100%, and something that you can share. This goes back to the pride thing, and knowing that your children will pick up some of that, not all of it, because they're gonna get their own ideas, but they'll pick up some of that, and other people. It's just a good thing. Well,
Absolutely.
Jack, man, I appreciate our conversations. I'm looking forward to getting together with you face to face at some point here in the near future. But guys, if you haven't picked up a copy of Fire in the Dark, It's already out, correct? I know this is an advanced copy, but I think it's already out if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it's out in paperback right now. And probably by the time this airs, it'll be on Audible because I finished that and I'm just getting the submission ready. So
Did you
yeah.
do that in your own, narrative voice that you were alluding to earlier today?
It's so much work, man. It's
It's a lot of work.
Your book too.
Yes, I did.
It's so hard. And this one had so many different languages in it. It's like, oh, did I use Greek and Old Norse and Iranian in this paragraph? And I have to look how to pronounce them all. So it was
a work
work,
worth doing.
Yeah. I mean, people really like to hear authors read in their own voice, and so I think it's worth doing. And so, I definitely enjoyed it as I got closer to the end.
Yeah, no, I bet.
Yeah.
Well, Jack, I appreciate you. I do appreciate our personal friendship. And I also appreciate, truth be told, some of the things that you've challenged me on in positive ways, of course, where you've pushed back on an idea or an information or something that I've shared. And I've thought, coming from you, a man that I respect and admire, I take that to heart and I really ponder over that. And sometimes I agree and sometimes I don't. But the fact that you're willing to share it and that I respect you, says a lot. And I just really appreciate our friendship and our conversations over the past several years. So thanks for joining us, brother.
Awesome, man. Thank you very much.